in the beginning of the 1800s, there became a time where authors and artists and things like that became more prominent because people were making more money due to the Industrial Revolution. They wanted to spend that money on things like the arts. They wanted to go to plays. They wanted to read books. And also people who were working in factories needed an escape. Okay, so they needed to read the books. They needed to see plays. They needed to do things to kind of get their minds off of their, horrible reality of working in the factories. So this was a time in which a lot of authors that you've heard of sort of became famous. And one of the authors that we have up here is Edgar Allan Poe. Have you guys all heard of Edgar Allan Poe? Right. And we've got a quote. It says, "Words have no power to impress the mind without the exquisite horror of their reality." So he kind of was a dark poet, and that's something that he wrote, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him in our PowerPoint. Famous authors in American history. So our first author is Washington Irving. It says here, "Great minds have purposes, others have wishes." Washington Irving was well known for his books about the Dutch settlers of New York. He wrote short stories and is most famous for Rip Van Winkle, published in 1819, and The Legends of Sleepy Hollow, published in 1820. Have you guys heard of either of those books? The Legends of Sleepy Hollow was a cartoon. You never heard of it? The Headless Horseman? No? Okay, yeah? All right, here's a little overview of the famous short story, Rip Van Winkle. I'm going to show you a little video.
Like many of Washington Irving's other famous stories, Rip Van Winkle was inspired by German folklore. The general plot of the story, a man who mysteriously sleeps for 20 years to find himself in a changed world, is easy enough even for children to understand, which is probably why its storyline has often been adapted in other works and forms of entertainment. Even my personal first encounter with the story was an old Pac-Man cartoon version called Pac Van Winkle. And there's a reason this is still so fun to read. It has all the fixings of a great story. A nagging wife, dogs, guns, ghosts, liquor, and of course, long gray beards. The story starts before the American Revolution, when King George is ruling the colonies. Right away, Irving explains that Rip is a pretty good man. He is friendly, and people in town tend to like him. If someone needs an extra hand, Rip is always ready to lend one. He is often flocked by children and has a loyal dog companion named Wolf. Rip's problem, we quickly learn, is that he isn't terribly motivated to do much work around his house, or even enough to really take care of his family. As a result, his wife, Dame Van Winkle, isn't exactly his biggest fan. Here, Irving paints Rip as the henpecked husband, a man who is constantly being nagged by his wife. In order to escape his wife's constant harassment one autumn day, Rip decides to go out into the Catskill Mountains with his dog. He takes his gun and heads out for some peace. Once he is secluded, he hears someone calling his name and sees a man wearing old Dutch clothing carrying a keg. Yes, a keg. The poor guy obviously needs some help, so without saying anything, Rip helps the guy carry his keg to an amphitheater in the woods. Here he finds more men dressed in old Dutch frocks playing a game of skittles, or ninepins, which is like bowling. The racket of the game makes a thunderous sound, and no one is speaking, so Rip says nothing and begins to drink some of the liquor from the keg. Next thing you know, he's getting a bit drowsy. Rip awakes in the morning to find that his dog is gone, his gun is rusted, and he's had an abnormal amount of beard growth overnight. He remembers the men playing ninepins and is worried about Dame Van Winkle's reaction to his late return. But when he enters town, things are different. Here's a picture of George Washington at the inn, and all the townspeople look different. After pledging his loyalty to the king, which doesn't go over so well in the post-revolution state, and meeting another man by the name of Rip Van Winkle, who turns out to be his son, Rip is assisted by the crowd that has since grown around him and learned that he has been missing for 20 years. He is also told of the legend that Henry Hudson and his ghosts revisit the Hudson Valley every 20 years, and many believe that Rip has been away with Hudson and his men in that time. It is then decided that Rip will live with his now grown daughter and continue to live the life that he lived before.
Okay, So there's a little bit of overview on Rip Van Winkle, and I want you to kind of pay attention because we're going to do this on every author, and you're going to see why at the end of class today. So that was our first author, Washington Irving.
Some people learn a new language to live their...
We are going to, as soon as I get this back on here. Now we're going to move on to our second author, that's James Fenimore Cooper. It says here he was born in 1798 and he died in 1951. That doesn't seem right, does it? No. So I'm going to have to fact check that picture there because I'm thinking it's supposed to say 1851. He was known as the first major American novelist. He wrote about frontier life in a series of novels called the Leatherstocking Tales between 1827 and 1841. And he was most famous, his most famous of these was The Last of the Mohicans, which was published in 1826. That was actually a movie that came out. Have you guys heard about that? I'll show you a little clip. Okay, so there's a little preview of The Last of the Mohicans. As you see, he wrote a lot about frontier life and the Indians and how things went. So our next author is going to be Ralph Waldo Emerson. We've got a quote here. It says, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." Does anybody know what that quote means? What does it mean to be yourself? Literally, what does it mean to be yourself?
To do what you want and go your own way.
Exactly. So what he's saying is to be yourself, to go your own way, in a world that is constantly trying to make you into something else is the greatest accomplishment. So what he's saying is kind of do your own thing, don't do what somebody else is trying to persuade you to do. He was an essayist who wrote about individualism and self-reliance. His most famous essay was Nature, published in 1836, and I think that you'll read this poem in English 11. He was the leader of the Transcendentalist movement that occurred in the mid-19th century and believed in the inherent goodness of man and the corrupting nature of societal movement. So he really believed in going back to nature rather than moving forward in big cities and things like that. And he also had some pretty cool quotes. So we'll just go over some of his quotes because he's really famous for his quotes, and a lot of people use them in essays and books and things like that. Interesting quotes from his poems, and a lot of them, like I said, you're going to read in English 11, and you'll have to learn how to kind of figure out what they mean. So we'll move on. Our next author is Edgar Allan Poe, who is one of my favorites, and I kind of took this picture because you guys know who Bill Murray is. Do they kind of look alike? I just thought that was funny. So I picked that picture for that. Edgar Allan Poe was a poet and short story writer whose writing was typically macabre, or kind of dark in nature. His most famous poem was The Raven, that was published in 1845. Have you guys ever heard of The Raven? Quote, "The Raven, nevermore." I bet you've heard it. I bet once you see it, you'll say, yep, I heard of that. He also had many famous short stories, including The Murders of the Rue Morgue, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Telltale Heart. So he had a lot of stories about murder and had a lot of dark themes. So we'll see a little clip about him, about one of his poems. It was just working. Well, since Miss Irwin's safety mode is apparently a lot more strict than mine is, I suppose we won't watch this one, but it was just a little clip about his poem, The Raven. And if you choose Edgar Allan Poe in the project I'm going to give you at the end of this, then you'll get to see more of it on your own. That's okay. So moving on to our last author, we have Harriet Beecher Stowe. We talked a little bit about Harriet Beecher Stowe a couple weeks ago. She wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was really famous because it depicted the life of slavery. It's a fictional story that goes over the horrors of slavery in the South. And it had a huge impact because it really swayed people's feelings about slavery, and kind of was one of the reasons that started the Civil War. A lot of people were really angry when they found out what slave life was really like. So I've got a little bit of clip, because that is a movie, so I've got a little clip from the movie that you can watch. Like it's, whoops. Hold on, I've got to. the trailer from the movie.
Well, my niggas treated just about as well as it's ever wise to treat them.
Now, why would a trader be interested in your little Harry?
Master said I was feeding him at his expense. Table scraps. Ordered me to throw a puppy in the bowl.
She likes to play with flowers.
Show be decent when white folks come to visit.
Just to find out one day.
Alright, so it's a very powerful piece, very famous, and had a big effect on the Civil War. Alright, so now that I've given you 5 authors, we're going to start a project. What I want you to do, and you've got all the directions on your paper here, so you don't need to write it down, but you need to pick which author would you like to learn more about. And then using research, you need to create your own PowerPoint about one of the authors mentioned in today's lesson. So in your PowerPoint, here's what I want. I want at least 15 slides. You have to have at least 10 facts about your author. You need to have at least 1 clip about your author or a piece of their writing, but no more than 5 minutes. We don't want to sit and watch a 30-minute video. We don't want to watch a whole movie. Okay? That clip also has to be relevant to your facts. Okay, it has to all kind of be able to come together. You need to have at least 5 pictures. You need to have at least 3 pieces of writing. So basically you need to tell us 3 things that they did, 3 poems they wrote, 3 books they wrote, something like that. And it's going to be a total of 100 points. We're going to probably start on this tomorrow, and I'm going to give you about 5 days to work on it. Does anybody have any questions? Alright, so like I said, you've got it on your paper. If you have any questions, you can come see me. Otherwise, we'll start this tomorrow.